Belinda, thank you for being here with me today. What are your thoughts on Senate Bill 16?
Well, I started looking at the wording of Senate Bill 16, and I think it's going to create a lot of work for local voter registrars. It's going to make it harder for everyday Texans to vote. So I decided to go and look at the numbers to see if what they're asking your local Texan to have to do to be able to vote is really worth the time and expense that it's going to cost our local counties to actually institute this new law. And what I found was interesting was that last year in the presidential election, we cast over 11 million votes in the state of Texas. I went and did a little research in terms of voter fraud, and a think tank, which is considered a conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, actually has a map of documented voter fraud in the state of Texas, since 1982 to 2024, there's only 112 documented cases of election fraud. And so when you balance the amount of votes cast and the amount of documented voter fraud, we really have to ask ourselves as an average Texan whether we really want to have to go through the extra expense and hurdles that this new law will require for us as a regular Texan to vote.
A lot of the arguments for this bill that I've heard are, on the basis of there being a significant amount of fraud, trying to curb voter fraud.
Right. And that's actually just not true. I mean, even by the Heritage Foundation's own documented numbers, it's really not a large number. It's definitely not a large enough number to really create any kind of sway in any type of election, even a local election.
Do you feel that this law, if passed, would be at all challenged by any courts? Could it be viewed as unconstitutional?
I don't know if it would be viewed as unconstitutional, but I think the further that we go in restricting and making it harder for American citizens to vote, I think you're getting closer into having a constitutional challenge about how hard it is to vote, the average American to vote in any election. Also, you're talking about potentially having issues with people not being able to get the documents, even though they are citizens of the United States, such as copies of registered birth certificates, having to go through the extra expense of getting a passport and the process that goes through, because this will apply to everyone. Don't think that this is only going to apply to people who are trying, according to those who want to pass this law, want to vote fraudulently, but it's going to apply to you, average Texan, and you're going to have to go through all these extra steps to be able to vote. And if somebody decides what you provide is not enough, you might have to go through that extra expense of getting your passport and doing things that maybe you didn't want to do.
In your experience, how often do you have clients come in who don't have easy access to these documents, like a birth certificate or a passport, or something like that?
Well, I think that the average Texan would not know that the state of Texas has made it more and more difficult, even for American citizens, to obtain their birth certificates if they have parents who do not have legal status, because they have to provide certain documents in order to obtain their children's birth certificates, even if they are U.S. citizens. So I think that, as laws continue to target immigrants and their children, we will have U.S. citizens having a harder time being able to get these documents. But again, most of the hardships that are going to come from this law are really not going to be against immigrants. They're really going to be against the average Texan. You'd be surprised how hard sometimes it is for an average Texan to get a hold of certain documents or to want to spend the money for a passport for them and or for a teenager who wants to vote for the first time at 18. So I think, the problem is that a lot of this is going to fall on the average Texan. And sometimes what we think is going to really target others is really targeting ourselves.
You mentioned you feel that this will impact the average Texan, but is there a specific group you feel this will particularly impact if this law were to go into effect?
I think that it'll particularly impact those who are living kind of below the margins. In other words, those who can't afford to get their passport in order to prove their citizenship, maybe don't have access or regular access to going to get a certified birth record, or don't have proper, because in order to get your birth certificate, you have to have a driver's license or an ID. So maybe they owe fines at the driver's license, or certain other things that make it hard for them to get their driver's license or their identification, which makes it impossible possible for them to get their birth certificate. And so again, you are going to see that usually it's going to impact people living on the margins in our society who have the right to vote.
Now, there was some talk in the public hearing on Senate Bill 16 about some non-citizens being able to vote in certain state and local elections in other states. I want to get your take on, whether that's ever been, constitutionally challenged, if that's lawful, just, overall, non-citizens voting in state and local elections.
Well, I think that's interesting because that's not the case in Texas. So I don't even think it's something that should be a part of a reason that we should be doing this in Texas. Why make it harder for Texans to vote? Because what other states are doing. And so whether it's constitutional or not, I can't really say what other states and their constitutions state, but I can tell you it's not happening in Texas. So it really shouldn't be a reason that Texans should be having to go through these extra steps to be able to vote. And I will also say this, the reality is, and I think this is a misconception that we all need to really just accept. The reality is people are not running out to vote. Not non-citizens or citizens. I mean, we have a large problem with even getting citizens to vote. So I think it's interesting that we want to make it harder for citizens to vote, and say that it's because non-citizens are wanting to vote. And in all reality, that's not supported by the numbers, and that's not supported by the truth.
And this law also creates certain state jail felonies for certain offenses. I want to get your take on some of those consequences, who specifically they would impact, that would impact.
That's correct. I mean, it's basically making it more difficult for organizations or nonprofits that maybe used to do voter registration drives to be able to help, certain classes of people to get registered who maybe don't know how you can register to vote. It's basically targeting those groups. I mean, we've seen that in the state of Texas in the past few years under the Attorney General, targeting certain minority groups that seek to register voters. And so I do believe that these penalties are directed, mostly at them.
Just for, some of our audience to know, if you do currently register to vote in Texas and you are a non-citizen and you do that knowingly, what are the consequences currently in place for that?
I mean, you can be convicted, and there are convictions on file. You can spend time in jail. I mean, there's that already exists. So they're really, I don't think that these new crimes that they are putting into this law have anything to do with actually targeting non-citizens, because there's already laws on the books for that. This is really trying to hamper the efforts of voter registration drives and all of that, because if you require these documents, and if you read the law, these voter registration drives won't allow them to be able to accept these documents and review them. They will actually have to go to the registrar to do that. It creates an extra step. Again, it's all targeting marginalized groups, whether that's minority groups or those who, have less financial means, to discourage them from voting.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell our audience about Senate Bill 16?
I think that people should be concerned about it because it's going to cause more of an issue for citizens, and it's really not going to address a real problem that Texas faces right now. Non-citizens are not trying to vote in this state. I mean, I've been doing this for 18 years, and I have yet to come across a case of a non-citizen who voted or attempted to vote. I think that we need to focus on how do we get more Texans to vote, not less people to vote.